Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Israel's first ever credit rating downgrade and a negative outlook for the economy. The war on Gaza is straining the nation's finances. Also this week, commercial real estate in the US is faltering. The unfolding crisis is hitting regional banks as far away as Japan and Germany. Plus, nations across the world are testing a 4-day work week, but does it really increase productivity and improve work-life balance? Massive military spending, a drop in revenues and a depleted workforce. Israel is borrowing heavily to fund its war on Gaza, and it's now on track to run one of its widest budget deficits this century. Worried about the fiscal and political risks, Moody's has lowered Israel's credit rating for the first time. Now, that will likely make it more expensive for the nation to borrow money. The agency's also forecast a negative outlook for the economy, opening the door for a further downgrade. Israel's finance minister has slammed the decision as a political manifesto. But is it? Rory Challens reports from occupied East Jerusalem.
Within a stone's throw of Jerusalem's old city, the Jerusalem Hotel has endured through good times and bad since the 1940s. Its old-world Palestinian charm appeals to the tourists who usually flock to experience this ancient city's unique history. Yet, since October the 7th, most rooms have lain empty as cancellations rolled in and demand plummeted.
We immediately lost 50%, and as time passes, we are losing more. Now we're running at 30% of what we used to have before, and if the situation continues, it might become even worse.
Riyadh is far from the only one to have noticed that the war is bad for business here. Last weekend, Moodys, one of the 3 international credit rating agencies, downgraded Israel's credit rating from A1 to A2. Now, that's still investor grade, it's not junk, but it shows the strain that this war is putting on Israel's economy. Justifying the move, Moody said the ongoing military conflict with Hamas, its aftermath and wider consequences materially raise political risk for Israel, as well as weaken its executive and legislative institutions and its fiscal strength for the foreseeable future. Israel has never experienced rating downgrades before. The Moody's decision was a double whammy, not just a reduced rating, but a negative outlook too, which means another downgrade could be coming. Israel's central bank estimates the war cost at $69 billion over 2023 to 2025. Borrowing is going up to near record levels. The country's 2024 budget comes with a deficit of 6.6% of GDP. Only the COVID year of 2020 was higher. Still, the market response so far has been tolerant.
The interest rate for Israeli bonds have increased, even before the rating were going down. And this is natural, but Israel, because it's a industrially very strong country, the fundamentals themselves haven't been hurt much.
Far-right Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich slammed Moody's downgrade as politicised. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists Israel's credit rating will bounce back with the war's end. But no one knows when that will be or what will follow. Till better times, some investors, like Riyadh's tourists, might choose to stay away. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost, occupied East Jerusalem.
Joining us now from London, Danielle Bianchi. Danielle is Associate Professor of Finance at Queen Mary University of London. A warm welcome to you, Danielle. What do you make of this decision by Moody's to downgrade? Israeli officials are saying that it's not consistent with macroeconomic or fiscal figures.
Well, the primary reasons why Moody downgraded the Israeli rating is due to political risks and geopolitical risks, which are likely to persist even after the conflict ends. So the fiscal situation is projected to be deteriorating. In fact, almost regardless how the conflict goes.
So, what are the financial repercussions of Moody's decision, especially on investors?
Well, it's still investment grade, so usually you see a substantial increase in interest rates when gets out of the investment grades ranges. So certainly the borrowing costs will increase, but not dramatically. What really worries Moody's is the fiscal situation. The budget. The budget is set to deficit of 6.6% of GDP moving forward, and this is compared to a 2.5% that was projected to be pre-conflict. So it's really the fiscal situation and the increase in borrowing that worries Moody's and the markets, really.
You say that the borrowing costs are going to rise, but not dramatically. But there'll be a drag on the economy, won't there? Especially if the war goes on. Is Israel at risk of default in any way?
No, default, I think, is a stretch, but certainly fiscal deterioration. The direct and indirect cost has been estimated by the Bank of Israel to be around 13% of the GDP. That's a huge cost, and it's going to definitely take a toll on the economy moving forward. In fact, Moody's talks about persistent risks that are going to drag the economy moving forward, even after the conflict.
As we heard, Israeli government officials have poo-pooed Moody's downgrade, but are other credit ratings agencies going to follow suit?
That's usually the case, but it's not a given. It really depends. Typically, these rating agencies, they have similar models, internal models, so there is a likelihood that the other will follow, but it's not necessarily a given.
The Israeli Federation of Business Organizations and the Tel Aviv-based Macro Center for Political Economics have jointly forecast that the war is going to contribute to the closure of some 30,000 small and medium-sized businesses in various sectors. Do you think there's going to be increasing internal pressure on the government to sort this out, to end this war? As businesses go bust, people lose their jobs, their incomes?
Definitely, there will be internal pressure. And in fact, if you look at the Moody's decision, one of the political risk is actually what is going to be of the government after the conflict ends, and that's far from clear. So definitely there will be internal pressure. But if you look at the polls, there seems to be that huge support from the population to the war effort at the moment. So I'm not seeing internal pressure for the foreseeable future as a key factor here.
Now, if the war were to end anytime soon, how quickly would Israel's economy recover? In the past, it's recovered, but it's relied heavily on its tech sector. But that has taken a hit of late, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. It all remains to be seen how the conflict ends, when the conflict ends, and under which circumstances, because there's always the chance that there's going to be escalation up north with Hezbollah. There's always there's always the non-zero chance there's going to be a regional conflict. So it's far from clear how the economy can recover, if recover, and how. So all of those are huge uncertainties, which is part of the reason why Moody's gave a downgrade.
What do you make of the language that Moody's used as well? It highlighted a lack of a long-term solution to the war, and it specifically emphasized the Israeli government's rejection of diplomatic proposals spearheaded by the US for dealing with the aftermath of the war. I mean, what do you make of the fact that Moody's is being that political, if you like, in its statement?
I don't see that as a political statement. I see that as statement based on facts, and political risks plays a huge role for the economy. I mean, that's true for everyone, and especially if you are in a conflict. So it's not a political statement. It's really just stating the fact that there is huge political risk that is going to take a toll on the economy for a variety of reasons, direct and indirect, and there seems to be no way out. So I don't see that as a political statement. It's just stating facts, as far as I'm concerned.
The country's dealing at the moment with a depleted workforce too. Foreign workers have left. There's the ban on Palestinian workers. I mean, it's costing a heck of a lot just to keep things ticking along at the moment, economy-wise, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you look at the government debt ratio, is peaking at 67%. And that was, compared to 55% projected before. So we're really talking about 12, 13% of the GDP in 2 years. So that's a huge cost. And it's far from clear how they can recover from this, certainly in the short term, even assuming that the conflict ends soon.
Good to talk to you, Professor. Many thanks indeed, Daniel, for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Israel's siege, relentless bombing and ground operations have upended all manner of life in Gaza. The International Monetary Fund warns that the Palestinian economy is facing a grim future. The organization says that economic activity in the Strip has dropped 80% from October through December amidst the dire humanitarian situation and limited deliveries. And the occupied West Bank isn't spared either. Activity there is down some 22%. A number of factors are contributing to this, including Israel's withdrawal of work permits and the withholding of Palestinian tax revenues. Meanwhile, fast food giant McDonald's says that it's missed its quarterly sales target for the first time in nearly 4 years. The company's blaming the decline on Israel's war in Gaza and a boycott by customers in the Middle East. Sales growth in the region, China and India, fell far short of expectations, reaching only 0.7%. Other US brands, including Starbucks and KFC, have also slashed their annual sales forecasts. Now, the pandemic may be over, but remote workers haven't fully returned to offices. Buildings across the US are empty, and the value of commercial real estate is falling while borrowing costs are increasing. That's causing problems for landlords who rely heavily on debt. Now, their lenders, the banks, are worried about the impact of bad loans on their balance sheets. The past week has brought concerns over mounting losses on lending to the commercial property sector and revived memories of last year's banking crisis when 3 American regional lenders collapsed. But how much are banks in other countries at risk? Let's explain it all. In the US, banks have approximately $2.7 trillion in commercial real estate loans, and according to Goldman Sachs, small and mid-sized banks are responsible for around 80% of these loans. Analysts say that more than $2.2 trillion of the debt is due to mature in the next 5 years, and that's raising concerns about the bank's ability to recoup funds. Now, last week, New York Community Bank Corp reported an unexpected loss of $252 million in the fourth quarter. That's a significant downturn from its performance in 2022. But the crisis isn't confined just to the US. Banks in Japan and Switzerland are feeling the strain, while real estate lender PBB in Germany says that it's preparing for the most severe drop in commercial property values in 15 years. The situation mirrors the 2008 financial crisis, and there are concerns that it could spiral out of control. But US officials say the problem is manageable.
I hope and believe it will not end up being a systemic risk for the banking system. The exposure of the largest banks is quite low, but there may be smaller banks that are stressed by these developments.
Joining us now from London, Richard Seagal. Richard is a senior investment analyst at the London-based financial institution Ambrosia Capital. Good to have you with us, Richard. So are we in a crisis or not right now? Almost a year ago, we saw the collapse of SVB. Is this a different situation?
It is much different. The regulators have been much tougher over the past year as regarding the medium-sized bank. If you call New York Commercial Bank, this regional bank, a medium-sized bank with assets of over 100 billion. And this is one of the reasons for the crisis of confidence, and that it asked it to take measures to shore up its capital, and that helped to spook investors along with the unexpected loss. But I would say that while we need to monitor the exposures of commercial banks to commercial real estate, particularly in the large cities, we're not nearly at the point where we should be predicting a crisis just yet, certainly nothing like last year.
OK, but is it a problem with a short-term fix, or is this something that's going to keep bubbling away, nagging away for some time yet?
It will continue, largely because the U.S. banking system is very unconsolidated. There are, of course, the top 4 or 5 banks which dominate the country's system, but there are literally hundreds of large regional community banks spread throughout the United States who are very vulnerable just because of the nature of banking models, their assets being very large relative to their capital. And if a confidence crisis occurs, then deposits could flee very quickly. But to date, I think the regulators have done a good job of preventing wide-scale panic, which could have happened after the Silicon Valley Bank crisis of last year, which quite untimely coincided with the Credit Suisse crisis.
Yeah, as you say, world banking these days, I mean, banking is a global affair. They're all interconnected, as we said. There are banks in Japan and Switzerland and Germany that are feeling the strain. But you say that there's no risk of contagion. You don't think this isn't going to blow out of control?
Correct. This is one of the blessings in disguise, if we could say this about the troubles with the New York bank, in that it's, while very large, it's very heavily connected to the New York regional market, but it's not very involved in the wholesale finance market, and it's not interconnected nationally or internationally. By contrast, a bank such as Bank of America has a very broad national presence, but also broad international presence. So if there were this type of unexpected loss or significant rise in expectations about loan losses at a bank which is internationally connected, I think we would have to be very worried, but not in this case, at least not yet.
All right. Do interest rates play any part in what's happening right now?
To some extent, but it's much different. Last year, the effective interest rates was to cause losses on the portfolio at banks such as Silicon Valley Bank or SVB, whereas at present, it's more of a traditional impact of rising interest rates, meaning it's more difficult for the borrowers to pay back the loans. But I would also stress that to date, losses on NYCB's portfolios have been quite small. By contrast, they're warning about the possibility of large losses in the future.
Should investors be worried about what's happening right now?
I don't think just yet, largely because the market concern has been limited to one bank. I think at a time like this, investors would be poring over the balance sheets of every bank and its peer group. And to the extent that this has probably occurred, they and the rating agencies have done this as well, and they haven't found any holes elsewhere. In addition, as real estate analysts look over the commercial real estate portfolios of the banks and non-bank financial institutions, there do seem to be pockets of risk, but they largely tend to be in the central business districts of the major cities. And while that is a worry for them, the risks don't seem to be at the levels which should encourage investors to be worried more broadly in the US, let alone in the rest of the world. But I would also add that there are these risks elsewhere, particularly in countries such as Sweden and Germany, and it's possible that those risks could lead to contagion, although I don't think we're there yet either.
Okay, Richard, stay with us a second. I just want to ask you a question about something related but completely different. Nearly 16% of American millennials lived with their parents in 2022. Now, that trend has been on the rise for the past 2 decades. One of the reasons not to move out is finding rent a lot more expensive than it was a few years ago. But the US still lags far behind countries like Malta, where 70% of adults younger than 35 still live at home with their parents. At least they did in 2022. So, Richard, why are millennials staying at home and not moving out? And how's that going to impact the property market?
It will have a material impact over the longer term. As you said, in many other countries, it's quite traditional. It's also quite traditional in Southern Europe for children to live with their parents for quite a long time. I think it will have a big impact on the change in the relationship model and how the economy evolves over time in terms of house forming and residence forming and things like that. I think, though, it is inevitable as house prices have risen over time and interest rates as well. When interest rates were lower, the millennials were able to afford houses, but with a combination both of higher interest rates and housing values, it's just become impossible. But over time, they will adjust, they will raise their savings, and they will be able to join the housing ladder, as it's called in the UK. I think it's, for the most part, just a matter of adjustment.
Richard, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, bosses want their employees to work hard, of course. Some workers say they can actually achieve more by working smart. But how about working fewer days with the same workload and getting paid the same salary? Well, advocates of the 4-day work week say it could increase worker productivity and improve work-life balance. That principle has been put to the test in different countries around the world. Germany, for example, is the latest nation to explore it in an experiment that will last for 6 months. The country already has one of the shortest average working weeks in Europe, but companies have been struggling with a shortage of skilled labour. Other nations have embraced the idea, with Belgium the first country in Europe to legislate for a 4-day week. Joining us from Auckland in New Zealand is Andrew Barnes. He's the founder of the 4-Day Week Global, which is conducting the largest ever trials in different countries, including the UK, the US, South Africa and Germany. Good to have you with us, Andrew. So is the 4-day working week the future of work? What are the advantages of it?
Oh, good evening, Adrian. Well, yes, I think the advantages are quite material. Not only do you get an improvement in productivity, indeed in our trial in America, we saw revenues increase by about 30% across the cohort that was going through the trial. But critically, you also get benefits that flow through to the employees. Yes, better work-life balance, but that actually translates to actually better connection with the company. Engagement scores, for example, seem to go up about 40% on average in companies that introduce a reduced hours week.
OK, everything has a downside, though. Critics argue that it creates more stress, it impacts creativity, it's difficult to measure productivity, and it's not applicable to all industries. It can't be done everywhere. What do you make of that?
I wish I had $1 for everybody said, well, it impacts productivity. The answer is most companies don't measure productivity at the moment. What they do is they use time as a surrogate for productivity. At the heart of our proposition is a thing we call the 100-80-100 rule. 100% paid, 80% time, but provided we get 100% productivity. And that also extends to customer service. Now, what we see on average is companies that introduce this, their productivity overall goes up about 25%. We also find teamwork, creativity scores go up, and stress levels markedly drop. And that's primarily because people are learning how to work smarter rather than just longer.
Sick leave, Andrew, cost the German economy something like $28 billion in 2023. Does a 4-day working week impact sick leave at all?
Absolutely, it does. We see again across all the trials, it's been quite consistent from South Africa to the US to the UK to Australia, that sick leave actually drops by half, in some instances up to 60%. So if that was translated into the German economy, there is a 14 billion euro boost to the economy. It's a similar statistic indeed in the United Kingdom. So what we see is that people stop taking unplanned sick days. Now, some of that's because they're sick, and some of that, of course, is that they're doing home admin and the excuses we're sick.
All right, so
when you can substitute that for a planned, it makes a big difference.
All right, productivity, as you say, is likely to go up, or that's what the experiments show. Does that mean that the bottom line is affected too, that profits rise in line?
Absolutely, it does. We find in our own company, we've now been doing this for about 6 years, that we are twice as productive on a per capita basis in terms of revenue and profit as our nearest competitor. It does make a difference, and it is extremely sustainable. And that is regardless of the industry that you are in.
And presumably, Andrew, all of this means that the economy overall is much more dynamic.
Absolutely, because if you think about it, it's not just the economy, that the output that you're getting in the work that you're in, but you've actually got more time to do the side hustle, more time to upskill yourselves. Very critical for countries that are thinking about how they react to the impact of AI. And actually, you get better family cohesion, more time spent with children. That also flows through to better educational outputs. We see this as something where everybody wins when you start to focus on the length of time and productivity, rather than just sticking with a 5-day week, which is a construct of the early 20th century repetitive manufacturing industry.
Fascinating. Andrew, many thanks indeed. Really enjoyed that. Thanks for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, you can get in touch with us. I'm at @afinnegan on X. Try to remember to use the hashtag AJCTC when you do contact us. You could also drop us a line. Countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.